Thank you for joining. My name is Margot Schmorak. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hostfully. And I'm so excited to talk with Price Labs and a few awesome property managers that are using Price Labs and Hostfully together today to show our customers and who might be new to dynamic pricing or might be new to Hostfully's property management platform, all of what this combination can do for you. One of the most, there are really, a few key integration partners that we have, types of partners that we have, and dynamic pricing is always at the very top of the list in terms of companies that we recommend that our customers work with to run their business. And that's because you can get a lot of upside with revenue that you might not be capturing by using dynamic pricing. And also you can just make smarter decisions about your portfolio that I think make your business a lot more predictable and also adaptable during these really changing times right now, especially during coronavirus and with all the different regulations that are going on in different parts of the world. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Oliver, and I will not be able to see you guys' faces for a moment, so just please speak up if there's any issues, and we will get started with our presentation.
Alrighty, perfect. Margot, thanks so much for that introduction here. And today we'll definitely be talking about kind of why dynamic pricing is particularly important nowadays, why kind of having access to some of that local data for what's going on for future dates is so important compared to just using your historic metrics, which might have been sufficient previously here. So yeah, let's go ahead, dive in and get started here. So we will go ahead and start by talking about some of kind of the most recent changes to booking trends we're seeing, why they're happening, and kind of why it's so important to be on top of your pricing, staying up to date with all the data, and really actively managing your rates these days, how automation can help you in that kind of business process here, diving into a small demo of Price Labs, talking to some of our common partners here, both with Kevin and Cam on the call, and then just opening it up to Q&A with questions on how would Price Labs work with us here with Hostfully. So if you want to flip to the next slide. The main thing we want to talk about here is just how much things have been changing in the past few months. I know all of your property managers have probably experienced this. Everyone who's actively managing their rates definitely has been making big adjustments here ever since coronavirus hit. That's largely due to three main factors. So, of course, volatile demand. People aren't traveling quite like they used to, both COVID related and related to the economy and who's actually taking these days. A changing customer segment. So we're seeing, of course, a lot less international travel. A lot of countries have travel restrictions. A lot of urban markets just aren't seeing the business travel that they used to. A lot of that is purely supplemented by the leisure side of things. So bookings as a whole have changed, but then also the supply of what's on the market has changed quite a bit too. So both with some property managers, unfortunately, going out of business when times have been so thin, and then a lot of property managers, a lot of vacation rental owners switching towards longer term rentals, those midterm, those long-term rentals. That's definitely kind of shaken up the dynamic of what's currently on the market here. If we hop to the next slide, I wanted to quickly go over a few kind of trends that have been changing over the years here and how those are just so much more apparent with COVID here. So over the past few years, we've definitely been seeing a shift towards shorter booking windows. So that generally means that bookings are coming in a lot more last minute than they used to be. So in this graph here, we're showing you bookings made for July in previous years and kind of when those bookings for July were made here. So you can see that gray, blue, and red line, there's kind of consistently been an uptick in summer bookings right around January. When people stop thinking about the winter holidays, they start booking their summer trips. But what we've seen after January is that that trend seems to be pushing out further and further to the right. So if we look at 2018, that gray line, we can see that bookings tended to start picking up right around mid-March, maybe start of April. You can see that graph getting a little more aggressive there. Whereas even 2019, so before COVID, before any of these major shifts, we were already seeing that booking window shifting out to the right. So people are booking more last minute. And we believe that that's largely due to two things. So since more bookings are made online these days. People are definitely holding off a little longer to make their reservations. In those true vacation destinations that we've seen, a lot of those East Coast destinations, people used to make a lot of phone-in reservations. Now that everything's online, you can see the inventory available, which both promotes a new customer segment. So people who are booking on those OTAs, they're definitely booking a lot more last minute. And people who used to book over the phone, who are currently booking either direct bookings or through the OTAs now, they don't have to plan as far in advance since they just know what inventory is on the market there. Now, why that's generally important to you is if you're following historic trends. So if you're following your booking pacing from 2018, for example, when we're in 2019, you're definitely, expecting more bookings to come in April. Let's say that doesn't materialize since more people are booking last minute. You might start dropping your rates pretty significantly to try to get those bookings, whereas you should be keeping rates steady since those bookings have just been pushed further out. So generally not fully relying on your historic data, not relying on how things were since those trends have been changing drastically. So really keeping that forward-looking eye here. In 2020, of course, we saw this trend just be highlighted a lot more drastically. So we saw demand pretty much completely die down in March and April for those summer months since there was so much uncertainty. And all of that demand kind of picked back up in the last few months here. So if you were someone who dropped rates significantly to try to get that summer demand back in April, you probably left a lot of money on the table since those bookings still came in just a lot later here. So definitely just kind of highlighting the need to stay on top of your rates here. Margot, if we go to the next slide here. So this is, of course, easy to look back. Hey, hindsight's great. Maybe we shouldn't have dropped rates for July quite as much. But when we look at something like October, so October hasn't happened yet. And if we look at the data for now bookings that occurred for October, we see 2018 and 2019, of course, that shift, things being booked slightly more last minute. But then for 2020, we definitely saw a slight peak in the end of July or early August for those October bookings. But then those bookings essentially just started going completely away towards the end of August here. So highlighting again the need to just stay on top of the data, constantly look at trends. It's not enough to just say, hey, these are the bookings that are happening. You really do have to be looking at this on a weekly basis to see how things are changing. Because, for example, at this point, we see that October likely will not get as many bookings as historically, as we've seen historically. So now might actually be a good time to maybe drop rates to capture any of that demand that's there. So really being nimble with your pricing strategies here. So that's roughly what we've been seeing on the pricing side and how demand has been changing. If we look at length of stays here, this is another trend just to highlight, where similar to pricing, with that demand changing, the demand for who's actually booking your properties changes over time here. So if you were to say, hey, these are my high season rates, and if you were to just leave those as your high season rates for the 6 months leading up to your booking date, that might be okay if demand is strong. However, there's definitely different booking segments coming in and making reservations for those properties here. So if we look at people who are making reservations for July, the people who are booking way back in October, they're booking much longer length of stays here, length of stays plotted on the y-axis here. And what that's essentially telling us is that, hey, people who book further in advance, they're making longer reservations than people who are booking, let's say, a week or two in advance here. So that's something that you would generally expect. You would expect, hey, if someone's booking way far in advance, they're probably planning around several different people taking vacations. They're planning around holidays. They're planning around larger groups. Whereas if someone's booking like a last minute stay, that's probably going to be more of a weekend, maybe week-long trip versus those longer stays that we typically see. Now, what's interesting here is that instead of seeing shorter stays like some people expected with COVID, we've definitely seen just longer stays, especially leading up to those summer months. So starting in April, going through July, those stay lengths have been longer than 2018 and 2019, largely due just to pent-up demand. So people who would have booked those longer stays earlier held off for a little bit here. And then also excuse me. Also due to just people having more time on their hands, a lot of people working remotely, a lot of schools being fully remote here, so people can afford to take those longer stays, make those a little more last minute here. So with this, we're mostly trying to highlight that if you were to have one minimum stay restriction for your properties for the high season, and if you were to never adjust that, let's say that minimum night restriction is a 7-night restriction, that might work well, you know, several months before those bookings start really coming in here. That 7-night restriction might work well between, let's say, August and January. But as you get closer to the booking date, that demographic of who's making those reservations definitely changes. So being flexible with your policies and changing those as you get closer to the booking window, definitely recommended here. So if we hop to the next slide here, kind of to sum it up, it's just that the hosts who reacted early were definitely the big winners here. So whether you're adjusting your prices, adjusting your length of stays, adjusting your availability, your length of stay discounts, what we notice is that in times when there's these major shifts, it really is being kind of first to the game is what gets you the best responses here. So for example, when we had travel uncertainty back in February, all those hosts who were decreasing their length of stay restrictions were capitalizing on all those 1- and 2-night bookings of people just not knowing what they were going to do. In March, when demand dropped off really quickly, we had a lot of hosts who nearly cut their rates in half, but who were able to maintain high occupancies that way. Whereas all the hosts who might have followed 2 weeks, maybe a month later, they were now competing with the rest of the market that had lower rates and that lower demand coming in. So it really was kind of the initial reaction from hosts. That's what we saw really driving kind of the best results in pricing here. So not just following the trends, but really being ahead of these trends, reacting to the market early and making sure your kind of prices and minimum stays are up to date in what's going on with the market here.
Oliver, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I was wondering if we might want to hear from some of our guests who are property managers who actually had to live through this process. Kevin or Cam, would either of you like to comment on your experience recently?
Sure. Yeah, I just recalling back the memories from those days. I got very aggressive when the kind of the bottom fell out around March out here, and I'm in Virginia Beach, so it's a very seasonal business. So I saw all my summer reservations come and cancel, and so I thought to act pretty quickly and got very aggressive with long-term discounts and was able to secure some long-term bookings there. And the fortunate thing for me personally, it's kind of been a blessing in disguise a little bit, because I've only been using PriceLabs for a little under a year. November will be my 1-year anniversary. And I think I had a lot of summer reservations booked at lower prices than I should have, because I wasn't as familiar with the software yet. And then, so once the reservations ended up picking back up, it was kind of a blessing in disguise for me, because then I was able to actually apply the rates that the market was getting. And it wasn't so much of a guessing game. I saw a lot of data behind what I was doing. And I also, at the same time, grew my business, going from really just a handful of listings in April of this year to over 10 now. So the data really helped me to determine what to do and how quickly to do it. And again, I think I'm a fortunate one, because we have the beach here. So that's about the only place people are traveling nowadays. But it was very, again, just a blessing in disguise with all this, because all those low rate cancellations came in, and then I was able to get those rebooked at much higher rates this busy season.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. I think that's super helpful for other people as they consider getting started and what are the things that they should think about. But it's of course, it's always walk before you run, right? It's just a natural process, but it's really helpful to hear from people that are a few steps ahead to understand what they should be looking for.
It's been very beneficial. I mean, I was just pulling some data today, kind of sifting through some things, and my year over year for the properties that I have had, I'm up almost 30% in revenue on those. And
Wow.
and the time factor, because before Price Labs, I was doing everything kind of manually, looking at the comparables in the market and trying to figure out, what their availability is and how much I should match their prices and so on and so forth. Now I almost try to tell everybody. I just stayed in an Airbnb last week, and I was like, Price Labs, you got to sign up for that. I even learned, I'm very technologically deficient, and I ended up learning from a 10-minute YouTube video how to use Price Labs. And while it does take some time to really understand your market and your comparable properties and things like that, using the software and modifying the rates came pretty easy to me, which is a shocker.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
Cam, do you have anything to add to this? I mean, it's just, I feel like this is experience we've been through is just enlightening for everyone, because everyone responded differently, had different situations, but I think we're going to learn from each other, because it's going to change again inevitably. So would you mind sharing too?
For sure. So yeah, same thing with me as everybody kind of did. I didn't do the same thing as Kevin did as far as longer discounts for longer stays. I kept my generic, the 10 to 15% monthly, sometimes going up towards 18% monthly discounts. But what I ended up doing was I slashed my prices for daily rates. I probably cut them by 50% for the daily rate. And then I would keep my 20 days to, I think, it was 2 weeks out to even 3 weeks out, still higher, because it was changing so rapidly. When April hit, everything was kind of happening. I didn't want to react too far and then get too many long-term bookings where now not to say somebody is stuck in the property, but I'd be kind of not profitable for my clients, and I also do arbitration, and I also own properties myself. So for me, I didn't want to have people in there at, basically 50% of what I could be getting, and then it changed so rapidly. So two kind of problems came from that is obviously we were getting lower rates for the first couple bit, but we were still staying in business. The second thing that came out of that was troublesome guests. Lots of people weren't traveling, but the whole thing was that, at that lower rate, you're in a different, if you have luxury units, or if, let's say, you have mid-grade, or if you have apartment styles, or, like Kevin might be beach with seasonal, you're going to run into different problems with different kind of guests if you're kind of going for a guest that's lower than if what you're typically going for that exact unit. With us, like, I'm actually in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is in Canada, which is now becoming more of a hub. So how Price Labs has kind of helped me is, I was able to react really, really quickly with, lowering my prices, doing what I thought was best, and then kind of reacting how COVID was kind of reacting. Now, what I ended up doing, and I think Oliver touched on this too, where, the April, May, June, where I didn't react quick enough, which Oliver kind of touched on, was, I left my prices probably too low into June, and I lost a lot of that market where I could have been charging more, because he's right. It didn't drop my occupancy rates, but my prices were still too low. So that's something that we kind of learned on. But me and Oliver had a meeting, I think probably last month. And now I'm kind of going into more of a business class. We're doing more executive rentals rather than short-term rentals. And Price Labs has kind of helped me where I can really budget myself on, executive stays for a determined amount of price. I don't want to really have those 1-2 night stays 3 months away. So what we ended up doing was, anything 7 days out has to be minimum 5 days. Anything minimum or anything outside of the 30 days has to be minimum, 10 days. And then outside of that, where it's all done through Price Labs, where I could kind of change the target market or the target audience that I was trying to do, and I did that all with my pricing.
Awesome, thank you. Two totally different experiences, but really helpful. And I think you highlighted some really key features of why you want to be using the combined solution of the property management software and the Price Labs integration together. So thank you for sharing that. Thanks for letting me interrupt you, Oliver. I hope that was okay. I just think getting those customer stories in early in the presentation is so important for people to understand how it can really work for them. So thanks for being flexible there.
No, that was great. That was great. And that was a great lead in into kind of exactly what both Cam and Kevin were saying here. So here we're talking about, reacting early, as both Cam and Kevin were saying. That was really, what helps you get those rates. But of course, the problem that both of them highlighted is access to local data. So you need to know what's going on. You need to, if you even have that data, you need to be monitoring those trends on a daily, weekly basis, since everything's changing so much. I mean, Cam was saying that, hey, you don't necessarily want to discount anything more than 3 weeks out, since you have no idea what's going to happen in the market. Are things going to pop back up? That's really why that constant monitoring is important. And then, of course, making those adjustments to your rates based off of what you see. You definitely need to have kind of a system that makes that quick and easy. So even if you do identify that, hey, every week my pricing strategy should change completely, if it takes you, let's say, 4 or 5 hours to make that change, that's not necessarily a sustainable model here. So trying to kind of combine all of that so you can both make those decisions and then execute on those decisions quickly here in Price Labs. So your guys' experience definitely helpful in this. So that, if you skip forward 2 slides here, Margot. Yeah, so perfect. So Price Labs' role, as we've kind of alluded in all of this, would be first to collect and clean all of that market data for you. So trying to make sure that you have access to what's going on, how are all these trends changing. For that, we're of course collecting data from Airbnb, Booking.com, VRBO, and HomeAway. Next step is actually adjusting your rates live based off of those trends. So whether that's an adjustment that you're making and we're just enabling through our system, or if that's an adjustment that the system's making on its own, based off of the data and those different trends we're seeing, just having those changes going in live and being updated on a daily basis here. The kind of third part that we haven't touched on yet is just the amount of kind of rule-based strategies you can apply here in Price Labs. So I know Cam was mentioning, hey, he's targeting more kind of executive clients. You're definitely doing different things with your minimum stays. You're doing different things with your last minute discounting for all the different clients you're tackling just based off of their booking windows. So Price Labs essentially makes it easy to apply those, manage those in bulk. And then of course, all of our kind of rate recommendations at the end of the day would sync over to Hostfully automatically. So essentially trying to automate this entire pricing process, make it as streamlined as possible, give you access to all of that data, and just take those manual adjustments out of your kind of day-to-day here in Price Labs. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what we do here. So I think next we had set aside some time for any testimonials, but we definitely kind of went over the experience here in Price Labs. So let's, maybe just jump into how the system works here. Then we can get more comments from Cam and Kevin maybe afterwards. But jumping into how Price Labs actually automates that revenue management process for you. Now we'll talk about kind of how we come up with our rate recommendations, how those get optimized for the market. So for starters, we look at where the first time you kind of connect your Hostfully listings to Price Labs, we look at where you've been priced in Hostfully, what occupancies you've been achieving, and based off of that, we estimate a base price for you. That base price would essentially be kind of your average rate throughout the year, or like a price level. So if you have some luxury listings, maybe they're larger and newer renovations, those would definitely have a higher base price than your smaller properties that might have not been updated. So this is really telling our system how much is your property worth. Now onto that, we would start applying different trends. So We would look at all of that market data that we're gathering. We would analyze that data for you, clean it up, and based off of that, essentially figure out, hey, what's the seasonality of your property? So start applying these trends as kind of adjustments to your base price, increasing prices in the high season, decreasing them in the low season, then looking at trends like day of week adjustments. So how much should your prices be changing for weekends versus weekdays? So if you skip forward here, Margot, looking at things like lead time adjustments. So everything just kind of starts getting layered on, where all of these factors that determine how much a day's worth, we layer onto your pricing here. So after day of week adjustments, we'll look at some lead time data, start applying last minute discounts, far out premiums to your prices, and then finally looking at what's happening for future dates to determine kind of pricing for events and holidays in the area. So depending on the demand that we're seeing for specific dates, we would of course either increase the price or decrease the price. And then on your end, what this would turn into is kind of a pricing calendar where each date is associated with a price here that's kind of optimized for what's going on. So if you skip forward one more, Margot, you'll essentially see that, hey, we've taken into account everything that's happening in your market. We're rescanning that data on a daily basis, and based off of what we're seeing, we're sending over a optimized price for every day of the year here directly to Hostfully. So that's the first half of what we do, where everything is essentially a optimization based off of that general market data. The second half of what we do is kind of that user input. So giving you a lot of that market data to see what's going on in your area here. So we'll show you a ton of data like, hey, what upcoming bookings are happening in your area? How long are people staying for? How far in advance are people staying? Which neighborhoods have what prices, what cleaning fees, what monthly discounts are people charging? So really giving you access to all of that data so you can start building out your own pricing strategies on top of the rates that we're already optimizing here. So based off of this data, you would then be able to kind of adjust the rates that we're already generating for you here. So touching on things like last minute prices, changing the pricing for certain days of the week if things aren't, if let's say your weekends are selling out way more aggressively than your weekdays, just giving you as many levers as possible here to really make these pricing adjustments yourself, especially when it comes to strategy. So your focus then would really be being the brains behind, hey, how do I want to implement these pricing changes? What strategies do I want to tackle? Cam was talking about, tackling more executive clients. So you would really make those decisions here in Price Labs by using these tools to automate those strategies for you. So your time becomes less focused on the implementation, going in, making these manual changes, and more setting the rules that would let these changes happen automatically here. So of course, one half of that is pricing and all those discounts and premiums you can be applying based off of time, your own internal occupancy, all those things. Then the second half is your minimum stay strategy here. So of course, as we were showing earlier, that minimum stays definitely change based off of how far out people are booking. So by having to data in Price Labs, which shows you, hey, when are people staying? How long are people staying? When they book X number of days in advance, this can let you really set this minimum stay strategy where you can target, different minimum stays for weekdays versus weekends. Shorter minimum stays for those last minute bookings that come in, longer minimum stays for those far out bookings that people might be reserving, to really make sure that your property is visible and available for all of those different guest segments that might be making reservations here, and making sure that you're not missing out on anyone, and also that no one's really blocking off your future calendar with short stays when people might be booking too long or month-long reservations. So really, giving you access to that data, but then letting you set these rules based off of what you see to really optimize things here. But that is essentially all of the control you have here in Price Labs. And then the flow would essentially be having your rates in Price Labs. All those rules that you set would inform our final pricing calendar. We send that pricing calendar over to Hostfully. You're able to really use all of the features in Hostfully, all of their channel managers, so setting different premiums for different channels, different extra person fees, length of stay discounts. Then once you've applied all those changes, essentially sending our rates to all of the OTAs, whether that's your direct booking site, Airbnb, Booking.com, Hostfully would be the one actually sending those rates live to the rest of the world here. But that is essentially Price Labs in a nutshell here. So biggest question that we get, maybe we can do a quick demo after this, but biggest question that we get, of course, what's the pricing structure? We have a flat fee pricing, so no commissions, where you're just purely charged based off of the number of listings that you have syncing with Price Labs. Pretty low monthly cost. I'll definitely send out a link with what that looks like here. But we are starting everyone off with a 30-day free trial, just so you can kind of go in, test Price Labs with your own properties, and then moving forward, it is all month to month. So no contracts or anything. You only pay for listings that are syncing and so forth here. And then in terms of support, we're always happy to help. 24/5 customer support, so we're always there for the weekdays. Response times under 4 hours, so always answering email and able to provide help here as needed. So Margot, I think that's all from our end in this PowerPoint here. Would it be good to hop into a quick just demo before we open up some Q&A to just show what the system looks like from a usability perspective?
I would love to see if there are any questions. We have a pretty good number of people on this webinar right now who are listening in, who are property managers and also others from the industry. I just wanted to just kind of give a pause and let people ask specific questions to either you or any of our other panelists about the experience of Price Labs and what it's doing. So just, does anybody have any questions from the audience? We've covered a lot in this presentation. So
We've covered a lot.
I can understand if there's not a ton of questions. All right, it doesn't look like it. So we could dive into a demo. If we do that, I'm gonna have you share your screen. So I will stop sharing mine. Oh, here's a question from Chris Lucci. It says, you refer to neighborhood data. Where and how do you get this data? Great question.
Yeah, no, great question. So all of the data that feeds our algorithm, this is all currently coming from Airbnb and Booking.com. So this is all going to be scraped data. We go in, check properties every day, check availability, check pricing. By kind of refreshing this on a daily basis, we're really able to paint a picture of some of those trends that are going on in your market. So most of the data that we use for determining things like seasonalities, day of week trends, that's going to be broader kind of city level data. But then for determining what dates are in high demand in your area, we really do try to go as local as possible. So we'll be tracking roughly the 300 properties that are closest to yours geographically, so that when we're picking up, hey, high demand dates, you know that that's hyper specific to where you are. Those are those kind of closest property you that are experiencing that high demand, so we can kind of be actionable there. Yeah.
Great, and a few more questions came in. So one is from Michelle Baccaro. If you place a 7-day minimum on Vrbo, then your property doesn't show up to a guest asking for a, I think, for another day inquiry. I think she's asking that, right? So yes.
Correct, yeah. So let's say, so 2 ways to think about it. Of course, not great that everyone isn't seeing your property who might be looking for those dates. But let's say this person who's looking for a 1-day inquiry, let's say they're making their reservation 90 days in advance. And there's a chance that instead of a 1-day booking, you might get that person who's looking for a 7-day reservation. So by being flexible there, maybe allowing 7-day reservations, only allowing 7-day reservations for your far out dates, that lets you kind of fill your calendar with those longer bookings, if at all possible. And then once those 7-day reservations dry up, that's when you can start opening your calendar up to those shorter bookings to really fill things in.
Yeah. Another question about how technical do you need to be to use this? Can you use this if you are totally not technical?
Totally, yes.
Yeah, again, technology, software, smart stuff, it's not my thing. I guess I follow more the people side of things, but I think a basic understanding of analytics is probably going to be useful. But as far as like functionality and things like that, it was very user friendly. And I mean, even I've almost been using it a year. I reached out and just wanted to do like a follow-up demo to make sure I was utilizing all the features that I could. And Avila at Price Labs was awesome. She took an hour and just kind of rolled through everything with me. And not only that, but as they've been releasing new features, Market Dashboard, I love it because I was able to easily make some tweaks in like amenities and my cleaning fees, cancellation processes, things like that that I wouldn't have discovered before to help generate revenue and increase occupancy. So she was set me down and we went through the gamut. I've sent out a couple requests as far as like, hey, can I look at this or do you have that? And they're super receptive to really customizing and helping you in every way you can. So, I mean, for me, not having a dynamic pricing tool like PriceLab, it's a no-brainer. Like sign up yesterday, forget about it. Again, it's going to take a little bit of getting used to, but nothing will have the same type of benefits that a dynamic pricing tool like PriceLabs would.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you for sharing. Another question that came in is from Jeff Brown. He asks, when you scrape Airbnb, are you doing it by day? Because Airbnb will default to only showing the lowest price. That's a great question.
I can
Rick,
take that
you
on.
unmuted. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Yeah, we scrape it by the day. So we look day by day pricing and we do it every day. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help? I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, because I think otherwise what they're saying is that they'll show like the starting from price and that won't be very helpful for you.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the things people get confused by, right? Even while booking, which is when you look at a property, you see a different rate, but when you enter dates, the rate just changes. Which is at some point Airbnb software will allow it to actually have those dynamic rates even in that segment. But yeah, we scrape by day. And I know, Oliver, if there are not more questions, you may want to show Market Dashboard, which would exactly answer this question.
Definitely. Yep. And when we're scraping by day, it's also good to mention that we're not purely scraping that Airbnb's lowest price. So we're going into each listing, checking what its entire availability is for its calendar so we can really see what's the entire booking landscape, how are other properties in your area getting reservations for these future dates here. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And I'll share my screen real quick. This will definitely give you a better idea of kind of the intensity of our data. Can you guys see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So with these market dashboards, how this tool works is you can essentially create a dashboard with a radius around any address that you choose. So let's say you're in kind of the downtown Chicago area. You could create a dashboard that shows you data for all Airbnb listings kind of within your booking radius here. Then from there, we would really break down trends for what's going on in the market for this specific area. So showing things like, hey, of all those listings, what % of them are booked for every single upcoming date here? So this goes a lot further than just scraping that, hey, you know, this property is available for your dates and has like a recommended price of this. This is really digging into what's the availability and the price for all future dates, which properties saw new bookings within the last 7, 14, 30 days, which properties saw cancellations on what dates, how are their prices averaging for future dates? So really going in nitty gritty. And then by having this data that updates on a daily basis, we're really able to dive into trends such as when are these properties getting booked and how long are people staying. So try to highlight, hey, you know, does your market see a lot of last minute bookings here like Chicago, or are most bookings coming in, let's say 15 to 30 days in advance? So it's really having this data that can inform you on what strategies to follow, since, I mean, the strategies and the booking patterns that are currently going on are just so different than we've seen in previous years. So even if you have a good idea of what has been working for your market, this would be a great place to really check, hey, how have those trends shifted? Should I adjust my strategy for discounts and length of stay based off of what's currently happening here?
Yeah, and also just wanted to emphasize that if you are using Hostfully, this is free for you to use. I mean, it's free for you to use anyway, but especially if you're a Hostfully customer, it's kind of a no-brainer to consider looking at this market dashboard, because you can get these insights about your local region that might make it easier for you to do less research, on a personal level to figure out what's going on. And especially during this really uncertain time, I think that this data can be really helpful. It's funny, I remember like a year ago, before we were in the situation where we are now, where there's been such huge fluctuations in pricing and demand and occupancy. And I think that like the most sophisticated of our customers were looking at data like this. And then others were sort of letting things go on autopilot, because generally things are pretty predictable in vacation rentals, right? Like year over year trends are pretty predictable. But this year, and I think going into the next 12 to 18 months, things are much less predictable. They are unpredictable. And so having as much information as possible will position you to make the best choices about your business. And this is a really, really awesome offering that PriceLabs has, that if you're already a Hostfully customer, would be really valuable to you to help you navigate through this time of change.
Definitely. Yeah. So even if you're setting rates manually, no worries at all. Just having access to that data is so powerful, since everything's just basically, a reset has happened. None of the trends we're seeing really remind us of trends we've seen in the past. So focusing on just knowing what's happening around you, definitely super powerful here.
I would just like to mention that this market dashboard was hugely beneficial for me, because I have the majority of my listings are in Virginia Beach. I also have listings in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Indianapolis. So, and they were heading in two different directions throughout the last 6 months. And so it was so much easier to understand what's going on where and how to adjust to that specific market using these dashboards. Without it, I mean, I basically would have just been guessing at that point.
And if I can give an example around it, like, so if a lot of you remember that in the last couple of months, there's been talk about midterm stays, and we were working with one customer.
No.
They have properties in Barcelona and they have properties in Galveston Beach, which is so weird. But Galveston Beach next to Houston, right? And their Barcelona properties, they should get a lot of midterm stays, and they should optimize their rates for midterm stays. Whereas in Galveston Beach, it was all short-term, like 3-day, 5-day, 7-day bookings that people were just driving to. And so had they set their rates for that monthly stay, which Cam was alluding to, they would have gotten these month-odd bookings and would not have been able to capture the profit that they could get from those shorter bookings. So you really have to look at your market data to somewhat think about what your strategy should be in terms of pricing.
Definitely. Oh, and I was really quick going to say, just as Richie mentioned on these webinars, we're used to getting a lot of questions like, hey, market slowed down, what do we do? Very, very, very much location specific. So, I mean, with this tool, you're going as specific as you want to. Simply type in an address, a radius around that address, and we show you all of the data for all properties in that area here. So it can be hyper local based off of the market you're in here.
So Michelle, unfortunately, I couldn't hear the answer to her question about the 7-night minimum. I think I might put you in touch with her directly to just explain things in a more detailed way. Are there any other questions out there from people who would like to hear more information? Also, could you tell us a little bit about how the market dashboard works? Like, do they need to be a subscriber of PriceLabs, or how does it work?
No, they do not actually. Let me reshare my screen here. So if you were to start a trial account with PriceLabs here, if I can spell, pricelabs.co. So if you go to pricelabs.co, you'll see the start your free trial button up here in the top right corner. That will just kind of create a free account of PriceLabs for you. By default, we give you 30 days to our dynamic pricing software for free. But once you click on that button, you'll be taken to our main dashboard where you just head over to market dashboards in the top right corner. And then you'll have 5 dashboards that you can create for free. Those will be available until the end of the year for all Hostfully users. So you'll be able to just have access to 5 individual markets here, track that data, yeah, and make changes based off of what you see here.
Great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure people understood what the 2 different offerings were, since we sort of talked about them at different times.
Totally, yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Sorry for yelling no at my son while he walked into the room. I thought I was on mute, clearly. Anyway, yeah, we're all just handling all this craziness of working at home together, so I probably should have been nicer about it. But anyway, I will love to have you guys all on, and really appreciate especially Cam and Kevin for coming on to share your personal experiences. It always helps us to do a better job of thinking about how we're growing and what we're working on moving forward with our technology and our businesses, and it really helps customers as well, other people out there who are doing their best they can to make the most of what they have in their market, right? So I just wanted to say a big thank you, and I love that this is kind of a community building event in addition to being sort of a sales event, right, for Hostfully and PriceLabs. So thank you for joining. Is there anything else that you guys want to mention before we wrap?
One thing, look out in your post-webinar email. We will send out a code for the market dashboard so that they can be free for you for end of the year. And any current market Hostfully users will directly send it to them. So that's a non-issue. Secondly, wanted to chime in and thank Kevin and Cam here. Thank you so much for taking out time. Really, really means a lot to us. And lastly, Margot and Hostfully team, thank you so much for having us, for being such a great partner, and yeah, helping out with everything in these hard times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. Thanks,
My
Kevin.
pleasure.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be in touch with everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Talk soon.
Yeah.